Splines are like lines. They're not three-dimensional. They're two-dimensional curves and lines that we use to set paths for other shapes to follow. We use them to make objects from. We can apply things like nerve curves to them. There's all sorts of things we can use splines for. So this is going to be the very basic how to make a spline tutorial, and then we're going to keep revisiting splines from here on out. So far we've covered how to create objects. In other words, that these like boxes, spheres, cylinders, toruses, cones, those are the three-dimensional objects that we created in our viewport. What we're going to do next is we're going to go to this button, which is shapes. All the shapes are two-dimensional objects, and they're all made from splines. So for instance, I can make a circle by dragging out a circle, but you'll see that the circle itself here isn't solid. So it's not filled in with color like we're used to seeing. Let me make this a little brighter so you can see it. It's just an outline. And if I was to render it, remember our quick render button is up here. It's also F9 on your keyboard. Nothing will render. And we have to set it to render. Now, splines can render. I can go under rendering and I can say enable in renderer. And so when I render it, I'll get a spline. It's basically just kind of extruding a cylinder or a shape around the spline at this point. And I can set the thickness if I want. You'll notice you won't be able to see it here in the viewport, but as I set the thickness bigger, it'll get thicker and thicker. And I can adjust the sides to make it smoother. Okay? So you can get it to render. I'm going to turn off rendering, so we're back to it not rendering. Normally, we just use splines as these lines, and we use them as paths a lot. We use them to make shapes from. And of course, we're going to move towards making shapes from them. So I can make rectangles. I can make ellipses. I can even make text, which you saw in the very first video. I can make helixes, which look like little springs or shell parts. So there's all sorts of things I can make with these splines. But what we want to concentrate now on is a line. A line's the most common one that we use. And all you really need to do out of this video is learn how to make a line. They're a little tricky at first, and then you'll get the hang of it. If I left click and drag, and then left click again, it makes a line. When I'm done making the two-pointed line, I've got this piece that won't let go of my cursor. You just right click and you'll end up with a line. So we'll do that again. It's a left click, drag, left click to set the next vertice or end point, and then right click. If I need a three-pointed line, it's left click, left click, left click, left click, and then right click. Okay? Now, lines, if I go under modify, the line itself, if I hit this little plus button, you can see the line itself is made up of three sub-objects. So vertexes, segments, and splines. We'll go over each one. We're under modify. The segment, or the vertex, let's start with that, are these little red vertices, just like we're used to dealing with in objects. The first one you make will always have a little box around it, and that's so if you had to go all the way around and come back, you would know which one you needed to hook up to. The segments are the lines between the little vertices, so they're very much like edges were over in objects. And we can move each of these segments. You can see if I grab one, I can move it, just like it's a regular edge or piece. And spline is the whole thing, so we can move the whole thing. Each one of these comes with its own set of options for it, of which some of these buttons we'll hit in this class later on. I'm going to go back to the line itself, and actually I'm going to go to vertex. Let's do that one first. I'm going to go to vertex, and I'm going to highlight this vertex here. actually, I'll tell you what, let me clean this scene up a little bit. Let me grab these two, we'll delete it, and we'll zoom extents all. And now we'll go back to our line, vertex, and I'll grab this vertex right here. If I right-click on it, it brings up the quad menu. And I can go right up into this area here, and I can hit smooth. You'll see corner by default is checked. If I hit smooth, it makes that a smooth transition. Same thing with this one. If I hit smooth, it makes a smooth transition. If I grab both and I hit corner, that means that they're going to go from point to point, straight line, point to point, straight line, and point to point, straight line. But what smooth does is it just averages everything out. Think of it as kind of making it so there's no tension in the line or at the stress point at all. It just goes, curves through it. It makes for a nice smooth curve. I can also go to Bezier corner, and I can get these little handles here, which I can move and make other shapes from it if I want to. So you can see I can curve that however I want to curve it. There's one other one here, Bezier, and I can adjust that Bezier curve, both handles at the same time with that one. Okay? So that's how you make a line in general. A lot of times you'll see me make a line and then hit smooth and then usually leave it at that. Now one other part to line, I'm going to delete this line I just made. There we go. I'm going to go back and make a new line. When you drag out the line, remember we left-clicked, and left-clicked to make those straight lines. But if I hold down the left mouse button and drag, it will make a curve. And you can see now it's curving. And so if I hold down the left mouse button and drag, it'll make a curve. Now it helps if you have some experience with something like Illustrator for this, because where it's curving, it's making a Bezier curve. And it can be a little bit tricky to figure out how to get it to curve how you want. And what you don't want to do is left-click, and then curve it back too fast, or you'll get that kind of bumpy thing happening there. You'll see that curve's going to be hard to manipulate. Just left-click and drag in kind of big sweeping arches, and you'll get nice, smooth curves. Alright? So practice making a curved line, something like what I'm doing here. If you can make this kind of helix shaped thing and get the line to go right where you want it to, then you've kind of mastered making a curve. Okay? That's how we deal with lines in general, and we will deal with all the rest of these guys as we move through the class. But we're going to be getting into lathes and lots, and so you're going to need to know how to drag out those lines. So give it some practice, and we'll move on with the other tutorials.